So please help me welcome Gene. Give him a big round of applause.
My name is Gene Epstein, and I'm here to recruit you. I borrowed that line from one of my favorite movies of the past few years. It's called Milk. It's based on the life of the gay political activist Harvey Milk. He found it fairly easy to recruit the people who came to listen to him. My chances of recruiting you, at this stage at least, are probably somewhat remote. So maybe I just came this evening to ask you to think about a few things. I'm in terms of the conventional political spectrum, I'm probably to the left of you in politics. I'm probably to the right of you in economics. I call myself a bleeding heart capitalist, since I strongly believe that capitalism is the only way to achieve a free society. It's essential to a free society. I'm a bleeding heart capitalist because I strongly believe that capitalism is necessary to lifting the standard of living of the broad masses of people. It's the only thing we have to fight poverty, and of course most of the globe is still in abject poverty. More to the point, and here is where I may begin to lose you, to have more freedom and more prosperity for the broad masses of people, we need more capitalism, not less. That includes abolishing such institutions as the Federal Reserve, speaking of which I now focus a bit more narrowly on my topic tonight. Even though I doubt I'll recruit you, I welcome the opportunity to speak to so many young people. You now have a bit more choices in life than your elders, unlike some of your elders, like, say, for example, Federal Reserve Chairman Alan Greenspan, who took a wrong turn in life and began to shoot up with the three most addictive drugs society has to offer, which are, of course, sex, money, and power. I'm going to begin my presentation by talking about the meltdown of 2008. That's my killer anecdote. Millions of unemployed, mass misery, what caused it? I'm going to try to bring my presentation in under 40 minutes. I'm going to be speaking to my friend George in the back, who has to change slides when I ask him to and when I say next. And we're asking the question, the meltdown of 2008, market failure or government failure. You can probably anticipate the answer I'm going to give you, but let's focus on it a little bit more narrowly. George, next. The choices really are something a little bit more narrowly focused. It's not so much government failure or market failure. It's really a neologism that I borrowed from my socialist Uncle Abe, a blessed memory. Capitalism or crapitalism. That's as vulgar as I'm going to get this evening. Then what is crapitalism? Well, it's a contraction for crony capitalism. It consists of people who are crony capitalists, casino capitalists, crap shooters. I regarded Dick Cheney, of unblessed memory to me, as one of the primary crony capitalists. I was once told by a left-winger who taught me a lot of other things that Dick Cheney believed in free markets. I told him Dick Cheney wouldn't know a free market if he fell over it. He only believes in rigged markets, as indeed so many of the people in government do. They only know rigged markets. They don't know how to sell a product. You can't become the CEO of a corporation, as Dick Cheney did, without any experience whatsoever with business unless you have contacts in the Pentagon. You can't become Robert Rubin, who worked his way up, perhaps, by earning his keep at Goldman Sachs, but then ultimately became one of the ultimate crony capitalists or crap shooters. So those are the people who aren't our friends. We think they may be capitalists, but we confuse them with real capitalists, with people who know how to sell products, with people who take prudent risks. Now, there's another image I want to focus on before we proceed, which I want you to hold on to, which is the banker, the image of the banker we used to hate. The man in the suit who wouldn't give us the mortgage because we were a bad credit risk. The guy who felt that his bank has to be protected against bad mortgages because if his bank isn't protected against bad mortgages, it might go under because, after all, perhaps his bank is not too big to fail, one of the favorite phrases of our current age. So those are the people we want to keep in mind as we proceed in order to understand why the meltdown of 2008 was primarily, fundamentally, government failure, the failure of crony capitalism or crapitalism. Next slide, please. The main villains, which I'm listing, are the Federal Reserve, hardly a free market institution. It's a monopoly of banks. It's a government-run monopoly. And for all that Alan Greenspan pretends to be a member of the free market or subscribe to the free market, clearly that's ridiculous, as we'll see as we go along. The other villains, perhaps less well known, but who are pretty important, also have federal in their name. The Federal National Mortgage Association, affectionately known as Fannie Mae. The other one, Freddie Mac, a federal home loan mortgage corporation. We'll get to those people shortly. And then, of course, as we go along, we'll be talking about the crony capitalists, the casino capitalists, and the other crapshooters who are essentially products of government failure. Let's go on to the next. I'm calling this, quote, a mainstream view because it does come from Jeffrey Sachs, who's fairly mainstream, and it gives you some kind of overview of what happened. Let's read it together. The U.S. crisis was actually made by the Fed, he declared. The Fed pumped money into the U.S. economy and slashed its main interest rate, the federal funds rate, from 3.5% in August 2001 to a mere 1% by mid-2003. The Fed held this rate too low for too long. Monetary expansion generally makes it easier to borrow and lowers the cost of doing so. What was distinctive this time was that the new borrowing was concentrated in housing. Now that's it in broad brushstrokes. Let me throw up a table though, and that's next. Now that table, let's follow those numbers, is just about the phenomenon of negative interest rates. Now ask yourself, in a free market, would anyone be crazy enough to lend money at a negative interest rate? Would any bank, any free market bank, ever do such a lunatic thing? Well, of course not. What is a negative interest rate? Well, negative interest rate is when, looking at 2003, you're lending money at 1.1%, let me bring your attention to that number, and the inflation rate is running 2%. Now, clearly, you're going to lose 0.9% on your money. That's a cinch. I could have thrown up inflation expectations. All of that was running higher than the interest rate. In fact, Greenspan made no bones about the fact that he was putting the Fed funds rate below the rate of inflation. There was no question about it. The only thing we see on that chart is that it continued for about 3 calendar years from 2003, 4, and 5. And in fact, if I gave you a more detailed chart, you'd see that negative interest rates pretty much coincide and precede major recessions in the economy. And they have to do with the expansion of money and credit. Money and credit is now so cheap that it expands fairly rapidly and it can begin to do mischief. It doesn't come from the savings decisions of individuals as would happen in a free market. It comes from the printing press of the Federal Reserve.